Alright everyone, it's time to talk about something that's very interesting. Of course, Trump gave a long speech the other day in defense of Mehmet Oz, Mastriano. He was in Pennsylvania campaigning at a rally for them. Also, talking about Trump-related things. That was admittedly about half of his speech. That's fairly typical. Before I analyze the difference between what I saw there, watching part of his speech, and what I saw with watching Biden's anti-MAGA speech the other day, keep in mind, and there is a link in the description, I will pin it on YouTube as well, down in the comments section. I will be at a debate later with comedian Dave Smith on Liberty Lockdown. It's going to be a good one, I think. I think that it's going to be some interesting rhetoric. We're debating Trump, effectively, his legacy. Did he do a good job, which I think. Did he do a pissy job, which I think Dave mostly thinks. I'm not sure whether it's 9 a.m. Eastern or EDT. I think there's a difference between those time zones, and the actual image for it says EST, but the Twitter post says EDT. All I know is it's, as of the time of me uploading this video, it's roughly 6 hours until the debate, so make sure to stay tuned. Here's what I saw between the Pennsylvania speech that Trump gave last night at the rally and Biden's speech the other day. Biden's speech was called unifying, or at the very least the legacy media didn't wade into calling it disunifying, unless you happen to be the WAPO editorial board, which is absolutely hilarious because they've been some of the biggest defenders of the Beijing-Biden asterisk stewardship. I saw a great deal of hate for a very large number of people, and he backtracked literally within 24 hours on this. But in his speech, if you take him in his own words, Biden effectively called 75 million people extreme and dangerous and a threat to democracy. Trump's speech, meanwhile, who does he target? Congressional Democrats and some neocons in Congress, and a few other politicians, the Biden admin, the FBI, the DOJ, those individuals, and drug dealers. And that was basically who he targeted. I have a feeling that's a lot less than 75 million people, but he gets panned as it's dangerous rhetoric. Trump is filled with hate and is a disunifying feature within U.S. politics. Oh my God, he's targeting all these congressional Democrats. How dare he mock law enforcement, which the FBI is only a tiny chunk of. And don't think that Trump was referring to your local staties or sheriff's office. How is it that ridiculing a bureaucracy, which is clearly filled with corruption. We've known this since the J. Edgar Hoover days. You don't have to even bring up modern politics. They've had numerous human rights cases against them. They've engaged in effectively what amounts to quasi-warfare on elements of the U.S. population at times. FBI agents have gone crazy and shot civilians. They've dropped bombs on city blocks because of separatist movements. Waco comes to mind, etc., etc., etc. How is it disunifying to target a bureau, a specific singular government agency, and its overlords at the DOJ? But it's not to call 75 million people extremist. Then I thought of something else when I was watching, sort of counter-watching these two speeches. In Biden's speech, effectively, other than saying, well, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and out of dangerous dark times, we make our greatest strides in victory, and all that hyperbolic sloganeering, and again, Trump does the sloganeering thing too. Make America Great Again is a great slogan, of course. It's a little bit better than no more malarkey. Biden didn't really put forward any proposals. Most of the speech just talked about Trump. When Trump dovetails himself into his speaking, and he typically does, it's usually in the context of a platform, some sort of thing that he wants to do. So we want to secure the border. Okay, well that doesn't involve Trump centrally. Other people, in fact every presidential candidate talks about that other than Joe Biden. He's the first one since the issue began to not make that a platform campaign pledge. Trump says, well, the border's overrun. We were trying to fix it. We're going to keep trying to fix it. Biden has abandoned it. That's a platform. It's a policy proposal. It's something that Biden didn't address in his speech, which was billed originally as probably non-political. It's an address to the nation, forcing primetime to cover it and having soldiers behind him, which is a breach of decorum, generally speaking. Bush did this with his mission accomplished statements, by the way. I saw Trump talk about drug dealing, cartels, and so forth. By the way, disagree with him on the idea of executing drug dealers, unless you mean pushers. If you mean pushers that sit outside the middle school offering crack to school children, yeah, okay, I don't care if some vigilante comes along and solves that problem. If you're talking about Harold the hippie had an ounce and a half of marijuana instead of under an ounce, no, I don't believe that Harold the hippie should be executed. Just to be clear, that's a path that I cannot walk with MAGA, I suppose. But he spoke about the issue. Drugs and addiction are an issue. Did Biden bring up any meaningful core issues other than Orange Man bad and MAGA bad within his speech? Outside of the hyperbolic sloganeering, was there a proposal put forth? He was even panned by people on CNN and MSNBC. The legacy media panned part of his speech for saying, well, you've identified that there's a threat to democracy, Mr. President. What do you intend to do about it? Well, clearly make another midterm campaign speech, which is exactly what the anti-MAGA speech was. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is effectively campaigning, not just for midterm candidates, although that's the billed reason for this particular appearance, this particular rally. It's for Oz and Mastriano, who are closing in the polls. It looks like they might actually pull it off. See what happens. But Trump is putting forward policy proposals. Yes, it is essentially a recycling of the 2016 campaign in part, although it has expanded. You hear more talk of anti-censorship maneuvers. You certainly have even more vitriol against the legacy media, which I don't see personally as a problem. As an independent commentator who analyzes a great deal of the material they put out, it's basically just a giant hodgepodge of propaganda filled with lies. But there are policy proposals there, especially for drugs, crime in general, the border, subjugate, of course, all to one another. Foreign policy was mentioned. Well, we see the abandonment of Afghanistan. You see what's happening in Korea. You see what's happening right now in Pixel Planet between the Greeks and the Turks. It's a big problem. Trump actually intends to address these things. When he makes, therefore, a rallying speech, he brings up 4 or 5 beefy platforms, planks, to make into a platform, rather. With Biden, it's just Orange Man bad. It's just a more sloganeered version of anything that you saw during the 2016 to 2020 period with regards to coverage of Donald Trump's latest policy that you would read on Huffington Post or Salon. That was Biden's speech, that and aggressively attacking a large number of people, because it's all they have left. They can't. The problem is Trump can put forward a cohesive policy message on these other issues. We can look back at his presidency and say the economy was well under control under Trump. The border was more under control. Although, again, the border was porous even at the best of moments during his presidency. An attempt was made. Wall was built. Fence was retrofitted. More agents were hired. Deportations were a thing. Sanctuary cities were sued. There was an attempt to secure the border. It was half successful. We can say that certainly in the foreign policy department, it's night and day. The second Biden wades into office, all of a sudden everything goes to hell. Ukraine gets invaded, the North Koreans start rambling about building more nukes, etc., etc., etc. All over the world, you have more terrorism, you have more fighting. You have a goddamn looming crisis over Kosovo because of license plates right now. Do you think in a million years that that would have happened if Donald Trump were the president of the United States, that the Serbians would be getting all chuffy over the Kosovan government saying, well, you know, we're not going to accept these Serbian license plates anymore. You're going to need to get the ones that say Kosovo because we're sovereign. And fuck the Serbian minority, I suppose. That never would have happened. They'd be shitting themselves. They wouldn't dare to have such a fight from within the Western sphere because they'd be afraid of some sort of intervention. Nobody fears intervention by Biden. If anything, they invite it. They see the U.S. goofball foreign policy right down and say, well, if Biden does get involved, clearly we've already won. And so it's like night and day. You have one individual who's talking about policies, whose ridicule is aimed towards a few very select groups of people, all of which are in the echelons of power. It's the same groups he targeted before mostly. Now he's just added the FBI in there for obvious reasons, versus a person who addressed essentially no policy whatsoever other than the vague concept that democracy is under attack, so vote for us. It is like literally night and day. That's about all. Peace out.